Hi everyone, welcome or welcome back to my channel. If you're new, my name is Julia, and in today's video, we are finally going to be getting into detail with this documentary that we've all been waiting for, and that is Quiet on Set. This documentary was insane because it went into detail on all the heinous things that were happening on Danny Boy, I don't even want to say his name, Danny Boy Dirty Dan sets. It was absolutely disgusting and heinous, and I'm just going to go through all the parts. Now, I'm not going to go into every single detail. I'm really just going to hit on the main points. I tried to get as much as I could. But again, if you really want the full picture for yourself and form your own opinion, then I suggest you watch the documentary. Definitely with caution though, you know, a lot of the subjects are very hard to get through, a lot, like just really hard to stomach. So I would exercise caution in that regard if you are incredibly sensitive or triggered by, you know, just SA and just really disgusting things, which I think most of us are. I also am going to talk about kind of the aftermath of Quiet on Set. So a lot of things have come out since the documentary dropped. I mean, we have Danny Boy trying to defend himself on his YouTube channel. The Next Declassified podcast was joking about the whole thing. And other people have spoken out, and just other videos I found that I want to talk about. I've actually been posting and doing coverage of this documentary on my TikTok. I literally don't post on TikTok, by the way. Like, I just started really posting on it this past Monday. It's picked up a bit. So if you want to check out my TikTok, I'll put it on the screen here. And speaking of TikTok, I've been really wanting to learn more about video editing, and I've been using Adobe Premiere Pro for over 4 years now, and it's currently the editing software I use to edit all my videos, including the one that you're watching now. And so to do this, I've actually been using learning paths on Skillshare, and the specific learning path I've been using is Level Up Your Video Editing with Adobe Premiere Pro. So in this learning path, I've been watching this video by Jordy Vandeput, and I've been learning quite a bit about color grading and audio mixing, and I've done color grading for a while, but he shared some really cool tips on how to balance your midtones and your shadows. Like if you're increasing your midtones, it's a good idea to try and scale back your shadows and do it back and forth like a dance with light and color. And I just think it's a really cool way to upgrade your videos. You know, color grading, I think, always makes a video look more professional and more put together. And, you know, even though I'm not a professional, it makes me look more like one. So that's why I really like to do that. And then he also gave a really cool tip on how to achieve that cinematic teal and orange look. And it's all about getting your subject in warm tones while keeping the background cooler. And it's just this subtle effect, again, that makes a video go from good to great. And then there's audio ducking, which is a term I knew, but only in theory. Like, I would usually just set a preset on my audio and then lower it to mix my voice with the music. But Jordy really showed that it's more than that. It's really about crafting an audio experience that complements your visuals, ensuring your voice and music harmonize perfectly. And I just can't wait to use these techniques in my videos, make them more engaging and professional, and just upgrade my skills. So I found this learning path on Skillshare, which is the largest online learning community for creatives. Whether you're into film, design, illustration, or just looking to pick up a new hobby, Skillshare has thousands of classes taught by industry professionals. So I'd love for you to join me on this learning journey. If you're among the first 500 people to use the link in my description, you'll get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. So just imagine where your creativity could take you in that time. So thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to check out the link below to start your own learning path, and here's to mastering new skills and bringing our creative visions to life. But yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. So episode 1, we're presented with so many different things that have happened, but they really present Leon Frierson first, and Leon Frierson was a cast member on All That from seasons 4 to 6. His story is so disturbing because he talks about these costumes he was being put in, you know, these really tight costumes. It was just inappropriate. Like, they had these things draped on his shoulders and it looked like male genitalia. And by the way, I'm saying genitalia, you know, because YouTube likes to flag every single little thing you say, you know, so if you hear me say words like SA and genitalia, it's because, you know, I don't want to get flagged. But yeah, like, they had like that draped on his shoulders, a big prosthetic nose, and it was just so incredibly disturbing to hear. The documentary goes into detail of a lot of the treatment of the Black children on set, and that was especially disturbing to hear because, I mean, you had this big prosthetic nose on the kid, you know, he's in these tight spandex, which he's a growing boy. He's like, you know, a preteen teenager, you know, they're very self-conscious at that age. And in general, you don't want your parts exposed to the world. And it was just so disturbing. It's like, why are you trying to make a mockery of this kid? It's like, they're completely making a mockery. You know, they're mocking this kid. They're mocking Black people. And it was just really disturbing to watch. So he goes into detail on how uncomfortable that made him. We then have Christina Johnson. She starts speaking about her experience with Dan and how she was very, very close to Dan. And Dan kind of saw her as his golden girl. You know, she was always with Dan. You know, she had just a really close working relationship with him. But she started speaking about how, you know, she was told that she looked too big and too fat. And like, you know, once she started going through puberty, she was being heavily criticized for how she was looking. And there was a lot of pressure to look a certain way. They also spoke about the fear of standing up for yourself, for fear that you would get fired, fear that you would get severely reprimanded. Dan did not foster an environment on his sets where people could be free to disagree or express things that they were not comfortable with. Then they get into his relationship with Amanda Bynes. And I don't want to use the word relationship. I'm trying not to use that word relationship, but just I guess the working dynamic between Dan and Amanda. And Dan was incredibly way too close to Amanda. So one of the female writers on the show, I believe her name is Jennifer, she starts talking about where the name Penelope Taint came from. And she talks about how this was a big joke by Dan, and the taint is a piece of skin in between your genitals and your anus. And he thought that was hilarious, and he was like, let's name her Penelope Taint after that. And he told them, don't tell anybody, don't tell any of the execs what that means. And the executives asked, they're like, is there anything weird about that? And he's like, no, it's just funny, it's just a joke. So it's like, he had the perverse mindset of, she's a preteen, she is a preteen girl. Okay, let's move on. And these two female writers, Jennifer and Christina, who are working on the Amanda show, he referred to them as the girls. He was like, is it okay if I refer to you guys as the girls? Like, the girls, like, where are the girls at? The girls this, the girls that. And it's just like, these are two grown adult women that you're referring to as the girls. Yeah? Yeah? Okay. Okay. One of the most disturbing things that, you know, they talked about in terms of these female writers was their pay. The fact that Dan was paying these female writers one salary. They're doing two separate jobs, but they got one salary. And, you know, they talked about just how, you know, they just wanted that because it was their big break. You know, their dream was to work on like a big production like this, and it obviously boosted their writing cred, and so they wanted to take that opportunity. Then Christina started to speak about an incident where she was discussing a story from high school, and it was like this funny story, and then Dan asked her to tell the story again, but to pretend like she's being SODOMIZED, trying to spell it. Yeah, pretend that you're being and I'm just like, are you serious? I'm like, I don't even know. Like, I still am trying to find the words for this. That's just abhorrent. It's abhorrent. That's all, like, that's literally all I can say. Throughout a lot of this, you're gonna hear me sound pretty jumbled up and still in shock, because I still am in shock at everything I've heard. I mean, I thought I knew everything about Nickelodeon. I thought I knew how deep it went, and it goes even deeper. Like, it goes really, really deep, this rabbit hole. But just hearing it is just, it's very, very, very disheartening. They then talked about how Christina got fired just for having a life. So they talked about how during one of the weekends, like because it's the weekend, you know, you're off work, Christina went out to hang out with some friends, and they went to a concert, and the friends came over, and Dan fired her for that. Because basically working for Dan, you were working on the clock all the time. You didn't have a life. Your life was Dan. Your life was Dan and Dan's productions. The whole world revolved around Dan. So she got fired just for going to a concert and bringing her friends over. Jennifer then talks about while being on set of the Amanda show, Dan was showing corn on his computer. Like, there was literally corn playing while children are around in a professional working environment, which honestly doesn't sound that professional now when you hear about everything that was going on. But she had to witness that. She then discussed that she was hired back for season 2, but Dan told her that she would work for 27 weeks and 11 of those weeks had to be for free, which is so, again, terrible, because then he hired a white male who was younger than her and had less experience, and he got paid his full salary. So she was just livid at that point. She then discussed how she pitched one of her sketch ideas to Dan, and then Dan just randomly asks her, like, oh, aren't you a SEX operator? Like, weren't you a phone operator? And she's like, no, I wasn't. And he's like, no, I could have sworn you told me that. And from at that point, she was done. She was like, I'm done. She cried and she left, and she's like, I'm suing Dan. And she did. She sued him. She sued him for gender discrimination. So this was all on the Amanda show. And that basically is the end of episode 1. So this was all on the Amanda show. This was his first like real big show aside from all of that. And he already was dealing with gender discrimination on his first show. So this was his first show. Can you imagine just how much worse it got? Moving on to episode 2. Episode 2 of Quiet on Set really goes into detail of Jason Handy. So Jason Handy was a production assistant on The Amanda Show. They really talk about how parents really weren't allowed on set, but Jason got very close to the kids. And there was one child, her name was Brandy, who was an 11-year-old girl that he got into really close contact with. He started emailing this girl, which already was a huge red flag. They were emailing each other back and forth, and the mom talks about how it seemed really innocent at first. It didn't seem like anything crazy or anything out of the ordinary. But then one day, Brandy gets an email and she literally slams her laptop shut, cries, and runs up to her room and slams the door. And her mom asks her what happened, and she shows her mom the email, and he sent her a picture of him pleasuring himself. He told her that he wanted her to see that he was thinking of her. And I'm just like, this is an 11-year-old girl. So then the mom is going back and forth deciding, should I call the police? Should I not? You know, they're going to think I'm a bad mother if I call the police. So putting herself before her child, putting her needs and her reputation before her child, she didn't call the police. But she was like, I'm going to keep her as far away from him as I can.
I struggle with this, and I finally told myself, I can't call the police.
Brandy ended up leaving the acting business anyway, so it didn't even matter in the end because Brandy ended up leaving. So that was very, very disheartening to hear. You know, the fact that this mother didn't call the police. I mean, are you kidding me? Who cares about the career? Who cares what people think about you? People will think more of you for at least calling the police than to just sit there and be like, oh no, I don't know what people are going to think of me. That's just so disappointing, you know, very disappointing. We then talk more about Amanda Bynes and kind of her career, how she wanted to have a more mature image. She wanted to really age herself up. You know, she was getting older and she wanted to do bigger and better things. She gets on this show called What I Like About You, and that's co-produced by Dan Schneider and Will Calhoun from Friends. And I was really surprised. I did not realize that Dan had any say or any involvement in What I Like About You. That really blew me. You know, so I was like, wow, because I used to watch it in passing as a kid. You know, I didn't watch it like in detail, in depth, because even as a kid, I was like, oh, this is like an old people show. Like, this is for like the 20-year-olds and whatever. So I didn't care for it. But I was surprised to hear that Dan was involved in it. They say that Dan was constantly fighting with Will, and he eventually got pushed out of the writer's room. He kept trying to insert himself into the scripts. He kept trying to like make it his show, and they weren't having it. They were like, yo, this is professional, okay? This is big time. You better get yourself out of there. Get yourself out of there. And they pushed him out. Rightfully so. Good on them. So Dan denies this and says that, oh, I was focusing my energy on another show at the time. But he was still on set with Amanda constantly. So again, they go into more detail about just how close Dan was with Amanda, and they discuss how Dan felt like he needed to usher Amanda's career into adulthood. So this was a big thing that they talked about. You know, Dan was kind of using Amanda as his vehicle to get into more adult and mature television, and Amanda was his meal ticket to do that. They also talk about Amanda fighting with her parents. Amanda was having a lot of problems with her parents at this time. She was 16. She thought she was grown. She was dating an older guy that they didn't approve of. And so Amanda kind of just wanted to take more control of her life, but they're like, you're still a child. You're still our child. So Dan really meddled into that. Dan really meddled into the relationship between Amanda and her parents. Amanda ends up running away from home, and she looks to Dan for help. And then Dan convinces her to go get emancipated, to go file for emancipation. And basically emancipation, the reason why that this is pushed a lot in the industry amongst children is because when you get emancipated, you don't have to adhere to child labor laws anymore. This person is legally an adult in the eyes of the law, so they can work you and work you and work you. They can work you more than they already were without having your parents get in the way. So the emancipation went to court and ended up failing. And Dan ends up leaving What I Like About You. So then we then get into speaking on Brian Hearn, who was a young black male on All That. He was another actor on the show. Brian talked about how Dan treated the white kids better. He noticed that hierarchy and that difference. And Brian's story was really sad because, you know, it was his goal to try to get his family out the hood. He really wanted to just live the dream, you know, and he immediately felt the difference. The difference was palpable. They discussed a Girl Scout cookies sketch where he was holding a box of Girl Scout cookies and he was basically pretending like he was a dealer. They were basically making him seem like he was some substance dealer. And, you know, his mom started peeping that things were not right. She was like, wait, like, you're gonna make the black kid look like the dealer? And it was just so unnecessary. It was like, it was just Girl Scout cookies. Like, they didn't have to do all that. It was very unnecessary.
Feel me.
You want to buy some girly cookies?
You're not a girl. They set up the scene like he was selling drugs. And I was like, oh, the black kid gets to be the crack dealer?
They also had him play a role named Lil Fetus, where he's the youngest rapper of all time, and he's in the freaking leotard again, so the leotards are back, and it just looks just gross. Like, it just looks so weird. And they told him that his costume for this Lil Fetus bit should be like charcoal. It should look like charcoal. And you can tell that this, Brian is still holding on to this comment. I mean, I can't even, it's like, if this is what they were perpetuating to all of us as young people, as kids, can you imagine just how much worse it was for them? The fact that they told him, you should look like charcoal. It's like they wanted to make a mockery of these children. They wanted to make a mockery of all the kids, but especially it's like the black kids, it's like there was some contempt there. It felt like for the black children, there was contempt. It's just crazy, just crazy. They then talk about the on-air dares and how inappropriate these on-air dares were. They talked about the one with Brian where he had peanut butter all over his body and they had dogs lick the peanut butter off of him. They had bits where they had kids put scorpions in their mouths and all kinds of crazy stuff. It was supposed to be like the kids' version of Fear Factor. And I'm sorry, but I don't remember the on-air dares because I wasn't into all that like that. It was on. Like, I would watch it here and there, but I was way more into the Amanda Show. I have more of a memory of the Amanda Show and Drake and Josh. And I'm like, if I was a kid, I wouldn't have seen these as funny. Like, it was just disturbing. And you could visibly see the discomfort on Brian's face, on all these kids' faces, but they have to play it off. They then also discussed how Dan wouldn't even talk to his female writers directly. He would literally tell other people to tell them what he's trying to say. He'd be like, oh, go tell her this, go tell her that she needs to change this, go tell her that she needs to do that. Wouldn't even talk to the female writers directly and give them the decency and respect they deserved. Jennifer then talks about how you basically edited from 8 a.m. to midnight. You were working constantly on the clock, and she ended up going to the hospital. And all she could think about was, oh, I'll be back to finish what I did or finish what I started, blah, blah, blah. And then all Dan could say is, okay, now what am I gonna do? They then talked about this whole back and forth that happened with Virgil Fabian. So Virgil Fabian was a director, I believe, on All That in the Amanda Show. I think it was just All That, but Virgil was a director and he was looking out for everyone's best interest. Everyone loved him. Everyone really loved Virgil. And they said when he left, things just really changed for the worst. So as far as I'm concerned, Virgil didn't do anything wrong or heinous. They then talked about how Jason Handy became a convicted child essayer, child molester. I don't know how to say these words because I have to freaking cover everything I say, but you guys get my drift. So Jason ended up going to prison for 6 years, only 6 years. Then he relocated to North Carolina and registered as an S offender upon his release in 2009. And then in 2014, about 10 years later, he was taken into custody by North Carolina officials for violating his S offender registry and 3 counts of indecent liberties with a kid. So he is now incarcerated at the Federal Correctional Institution in Petersburg, Virginia, and his release date is August 28th, 2038. So we ride at dawn on August 28th, 2038. Psych, but yep, just wanted to let y'all know that he's in prison right now, which I didn't know, so thank God. And the thing that's so scary about Jason Handy is that he's walking these kids around set. Like, he's walking these kids around sometimes without their parents. And again, on All That especially, it was known that the kids really weren't around their parents. So it was very, very disturbing. And Giovanni Samuels discusses how she used to do Bible study with Jason Handy on set. They would have their Bibles out talking and he'd be like, oh, don't lose your faith in God and all this stuff, all while being this creepy predator, like this essayer. It's crazy to me. It's just so wild to me the way these people will try to cover themselves up and cosplay as innocent. They then talk more about Brian Peck. And Brian Peck, who is the most certified villain ever. Brian Peck was on All That, he was on the Amanda Show, and he used to joke around a lot on set and he used to throw a lot of parties. So Kyle Sullivan discusses how they were at Brian Peck's house for a party and, you know, he's looking around and he sees this portrait of like a clown, like this serial killer. And basically he asks he's like, oh, what's this? And Brian Peck is like, oh yeah, that's John Wayne Gacy. And then he's like, look at all these letters I used to write him. He was pen pals with John Wayne Gacy, an unaliver. He was pen pals with this man in prison. And I don't know how that didn't set off any alarm bells in people. Literally, like, Kyle, even as a teenager, was like, yo, that's messed up. But nobody seemed to pick up on it. No adult thought for a second, like, hey, that's kind of screwed up. Hey, maybe we should check if this guy's done anything to any kids. I mean, I wonder if they've checked to see if Brian Peck's done anything. I mean, I've heard that Brian Peck has done other things to other child actors, like the ones on Boy Meets World, but yeah, insane.
But I knew, like, this guy's a serial killer who, like, a lot of young men and boys. My instinct was like, everyone has to see this.
So then we get into episode 3 of Quiet on Set, and this episode was excruciating because this goes into detail about Drake Bell's story. So Drake Bell is detailing his story all throughout episode 3. So Drake discusses that him and his father and his family, they didn't have any background in entertainment, but entertainment was something he knew he wanted to do from very young, and he had a knack for it. Drake and his father have a very, very, very close bond. They had a very, very, very strong bond. His dad was driving him around for auditions. You know, he'd go to school. After he got out of school, he'd go to all these auditions. And so him and his father got really close with him doing all of that, and they really just wanted to make Drake's dream happen. So he books a spot on the Amanda Show, and things are all fine and dandy at this time. Things are fun. Drake's living his dream. He's enjoying himself. It's all fun and happy and sunshine and rainbows. And then in season 2, Brian Peck comes and destroys everything for everyone, perpetually, forever. So Drake started to go to Brian's house for lessons. So Brian basically manipulated the situation where, oh, I do these lessons at my house. I do these dialogue lessons and these acting lessons at my house, so you have to come over. And Drake's dad discusses how much he had his eye on Drake. He knew about stories that he'd heard in Hollywood with child stars. He'd heard, you know, things like this. So he's like, let me make sure I stay close to my kid. I'm gonna keep an eye on him. I'm never gonna leave his sight. And Drake's dad made sure he never left Drake's sight. However, Drake's dad started noticing just how close Brian was getting to Drake, and it started being really uncomfortable. He'd caress his arm. He would just be way too close to him, doing things for Drake that Drake could do himself. And he's just like, yo, what the heck? This is weird. So then he decides to go to production to complain because he's like, this isn't right. And this production assistant, this lady on production tells him that, oh, well, Brian's gay, so, you know, this is just what he does, so you might be homophobic. So they gaslight Drake's dad, accuse him of being homophobic, when he's saying that, hey, this man is getting too close to my son and I'm not happy about it. And your response is to call me all right. So then Drake's dad ended up being ostracized. You know, he ended up going to people on set. He was like, okay, production's not gonna work. Let me go to people on set. And same thing, no one really listened to him. He was ostracized. So they were already driving a physical wedge between Drake and his dad because nobody was listening or taking him seriously. And I really think that the people that didn't take him seriously owe him an apology. I hope they have, but they probably haven't, knowing these people. They probably haven't, but they owe him and his dad a big, big apology. Brian then started meddling more into Drake and his dad's relationship. He started telling Drake that, you know, you don't need your dad. He doesn't need to be your manager. Your dad's stealing your money. Your dad's doing this. And so really driving that wedge and manipulating Drake. And again, the thing with Drake and Brian Peck is that, you know, Brian made it seem like, oh my goodness, we're these great friends, right? Because Brian had a lot of similar interests to Drake, and Drake recognizes that that was probably really calculated of him. So, you know, Brian was earning Drake's trust and squeezing his dad out of the picture. Brian wanted to have Drake's 15th birthday party at his house, and his dad was like, no, you're not gonna have the birthday at his house. He talks about for his birthday party, like Drake, there were some letters like in Drake's bag or something, and the letters were just very inappropriate. They were from Brian and his friends, and it was just really, really disgusting and vulgar. And Drake's like, I have no idea about that. I don't know where those came from. So again, his dad was really starting to get on his guard. Brian then decided to hire an attorney to look into Drake's financial situation because he was putting it in Drake's head that his dad was stealing his money. So he hired an attorney and they didn't find anything. But I surmise that Brian did that to, again, drive the point home that, oh, look, he's stealing your money. Oh, look, he's doing this, like, da-da-da-da-da. Like, you know, put it into Drake's head that, you know, your dad is bad news. Then Drake's mom started getting more involved, and Drake was staying at his mom's house for a week, and Drake tells his mom that he doesn't want his dad to be his manager anymore. So Brian has successfully weaseled his dad out of the picture, right? And, you know, Drake's dad was devastated, but he's like, you know what? Whatever Drake wants to do, even though I'm heartbroken, I'm devastated. And then Drake's mom basically takes more of an active role, and the dad's out of the picture. But before Drake's dad really left out the picture. He warned his mom. He warned Drake's mom. He said, look, keep an eye on Drake. Don't let him around Brian. Don't let him around him. Keep an eye on him. And we're going to go into it more, but she ignored his warnings. So Brian started to get into Drake's mom's head about everything. And Drake's mom and Drake's dad already didn't have a clean relationship. There was a lot going on. There was a lot of drama, a lot of fighting. So they already didn't have a great relationship to begin with. So Brian getting into Drake's mom's head, honestly, I think was really easy. He probably didn't have to do much to get Drake's mom to believe in, you know, crazy stuff. Drake's mom apparently didn't like driving around Drake to his audition. She didn't like doing long drives. And so then what happened was Brian would drive Drake around everywhere. Even though Drake's dad warned her, don't let this man around Drake. Drake was also at Brian Peck's house a lot during this time. You know, he was constantly going to his house for these dialogue lessons. And, you know, at this point, Brian was completely inserted into Drake's life. So Drake talks about how one day he was sleeping on the couch where he would always sleep, and he woke up to Brian essaying him. Drake discusses how he was really holding on to it. He really held on to all of the pain and everything that was going on. And the lady interviewing asked him just how bad was it? And he said, think of the worst possible things that someone could do to you as an essay, and that'll answer your question. So it was just absolutely, I mean, and I skimmed like the documents that they showed of, you know, Brian Peck's conviction, and it was just, I can't even say, I don't even know how to say it on here. So I'm not gonna say it, but it was brutal. We then get into Drake having a girlfriend, and this was actually a highlight for him. He said his girlfriend was great, that going to his girlfriend's house, it really felt like a safe haven, so he started going there every single day. Then one day, Drake and Brian were apparently supposed to go to Disneyland together, or Disney World, and Drake didn't want to go, so he just didn't go. He stayed at his girlfriend's house, and Brian kept calling and calling and calling and calling and calling Drake's phone. He would blow up his cell phone back to back to back to back to back. And then, you know, Drake wasn't answering. So then he started calling the girlfriend's mom's house back to back to back to back to back. And then he answers the phone, and then he's like really angry that this 15-year-old kid didn't want to go to Disney World with him. And he's just like, no, I got double booked. Like, I'm sorry, I'm gonna stay here. And then Drake's mom picks up on it. Drake's mom is like, this isn't normal. This is not normal. So she immediately picks up on what's going on, and she pulls Drake, you know, into a room and asks him what's going on. And Drake's like, oh, nothing's going on. Everything's fine. And she's like, no, what's going on? So then he starts telling her that, yeah, some things are really weird right now. And so he starts opening up a little bit to her. And shout out to the girlfriend's mom. The fact that this woman recognized something was wrong, and his own mother just didn't even have a care in the world. I mean, I can't even, I don't even have words for Drake's mom. But I'm just so grateful that the girlfriend's mom was there, because that saved him. Drake's girlfriend's mom is like, you know what? Okay, let me take you to a therapist. So she calls Drake's mom, and they start to take Drake to a therapist. But at this point, Drake wasn't fully disclosing what was going on yet. You know, he was saying like little things, but he wasn't going into depth on what was really happening. You know, Drake said that he was scared, you know, that Brian knew so many people, and he was worried that if he spoke out that, you know, Brian could ruin his career. It was just a lot that he was holding on to, and a lot of fear he had. They then start talking about Drake and Josh, and how Drake and Josh is going to be the next big hit show. And, you know, Drake is really excited about this. And Brian ends up telling him, he says, convince Dan to let me be your dad on the show. And Drake is like, what? No. Like, and I'm just like, I cannot believe this. He was trying to play Walter. He was trying to play Walter. Can you believe? Oh boy, oh boy. So then at that point, you know, Drake has a breaking point, and he ends up getting on the phone with his mom, and he just explodes. He tells his mom everything that's going on. And from there, his mom immediately calls the police. So Drake details that the investigation was really, really brutal. The investigation was awful. He had to be excruciatingly detailed about every single thing that was happening to him. And then he had to call Brian to try to get him to confess. So Brian ends up confessing to everything. He ends up confessing to everything he had done. The interesting thing is, Brian Peck asked Drake, oh, are we being recorded? Yes! Yes, you are! And you're going to jail! But unfortunately, he only went to jail for... Okay, we're gonna get into that. We're gonna get into that. Drake then really discusses just how much stress he was going under at this time. He started losing his hair, his doctor started noticing everything that was going on, and he was just under an immense amount of pressure and stress. Drake then calls up his dad and asks his dad, like, did you hear that they got him? Did you hear that they got Brian Peck? And his dad is like, wait, no. And so his dad, like, you know, sees it on TV, and his dad is relieved. His dad is so relieved. He's like, oh my goodness, thank God. Thank God. I knew he was going to do something to someone. Thank God it wasn't you. And then Drake, this is just such a heartbreaking part. He's like, nope, it was me. And his dad breaks down, and even in the documentary, he breaks down. He's like, I cannot believe like this. You know, it was just, I can't even, it really hurts me because I'm like, man, this dude tried everything he could. Then Drake talks about how he started filming Drake and Josh just a few weeks after. And that really blew me because I didn't realize that this was so close. You know, as soon as like when Brian got arrested and convicted, he started filming Drake and Josh right after. That really blew me. I was like, wow, it was that quick. So now it's like, obviously I can't watch any of Dan Schneider's shows the same again, obviously, but I especially can't watch the first season of Drake and Josh knowing what he was going through at the time. It's crazy. So actually I lied. I actually was rewatching Drake and Josh while recording this video. While I've been editing, I've been watching like a few episodes a day, and it still holds up just as good as it did back then. You know, Drake and Josh are both incredible actors, and they had really great comedic timing. And, you know, I still enjoy it so much today. And actually, I think watching it does kind of warm my heart a bit because Drake mentioned, and I say this later in the video, but Drake mentioned how filming Drake and Josh was his escape. He really enjoyed filming Drake and Josh, and he has very fond memories of that show. Again, it's been a bit tainted now by what we know about Dan, and also knowing that people who worked on set with Drake wrote letters in support of Brian Peck, which I'm going to get into more in this video. So that taints it a bit, but I think ultimately knowing that Drake enjoyed his time there does make it a little easier to stomach. You know, Drake starts talking about how he's dealing with a lot of, you know, substance issues and alcohol issues, and you know, he talks about all the pressure of being this perfect child star. He's like, you know, I have to be a role model, but I don't know how to be. I don't even know who I am. I've been broken down. How do I be a role model for others when I can't even help myself? You know, he didn't say all that, but that's kind of what I gathered from it, you know? He then talks about how Dan really, throughout this whole time, was the only one that was truly there for him. He talks about how Dan was asking if he was okay, you know, do you need anything? And I surmise that the reason for this is because Drake was about to do Drake and Josh. You know, he's half of the duo, so he has to be okay. Drake has to be okay, you know? Also, Dan didn't like the boys. He was into the girls. That's what I think. So that, and I'm sorry if it sounded like I was rambling, but that was episode 3. All right, we then get into episode 4 with Quiet on Set, and basically this episode was crazy because Drake talks about how during Brian's sentencing, his entire side of the courtroom was full of support, full of people supporting him. And on Drake's side, it was literally just him, his mom, and his brother. So again, this is appalling. This is appalling, all these famous people. These are famous people that are coming out to support Brian Peck. So Drake told the people in the courtroom, he said, how dare you? So he said, and I quote, "You will forever have the memory of sitting in this courtroom and defending this person, and I will forever have the memory of this person you're defending violating me and doing unspeakable acts and crimes. And that's what I'll remember." And kudos to Drake for speaking up. Kudos to him for getting up there and really just speaking his mind, speaking his piece. He was great for that because he was only like 16 or 17. Brian then pleads no contest to 16 counts of child SA. And he only gets 16 months in prison. Not 16 years, not 16 decades. 16 months. He then has to register as a child offender. So the journalists that were actually making this documentary actually petitioned the court to have them release the court records from this case. And so these records haven't been seen or read for 20 years. And they find 41 letters of support for Brian Peck. 41 letters of support from famous people. They're talking about all kinds of people that are super famous. I mean, you have James Marsden, Ryder Strong and Will Friedle from Boy Meets World. And I want to get into them real quick. I want to get into the Boy Meets World cast because they discussed on their podcast, I think back in February, about Brian Peck and how Brian Peck manipulated them and stuff like that. And, you know, they wrote letters of support for him. And they said that when Drake's mom spoke and during the trial, they realized like, oh man, we're on the wrong side of this thing. But what really gets me about them is the fact that they were well into their 20s. And again, I will say that for a lot of time, for some people, it takes them a long time to come to terms with what's happened to them. But my thing is the fact that they knew they were wrong. They knew what Brian had done. And I think it's the fact that they waited 20 years. They had like over 20 years, because this happened in August 2003. They had over 20 years to make amends with Drake. And Drake calls them out. Drake called them out. I don't remember exactly what he said, but he did call them out. And I'm like, you had over 20 years to make amends and make things right, and you chose not to. So again, I am glad that they came on their podcast and really reflected on their experience and discussed just how deep the manipulation was by Brian Peck and how they were misled. But I just still think they could have apologized to Drake. I still think that they could have made good with this whole situation and really rectified everything, since they've known for so long and they've known for over 20 years now. So that's what doesn't really make sense to me. You know, you could have just ironed all of this out years ago. You know. They then talk about another convicted child S offender that was on the set. So it was multiple people that were child S offenders and crazy people on set and not protecting these children. They then talk about how iCarly is getting bigger and bigger, and Nickelodeon is facing stiffer competition from Disney. And I remember this time. I remember just how much, like, both Nickelodeon and Disney were very popular at this time with their sitcoms. And so there was a lot of competition, and Dan was facing more pressure, and, you know, things just got worse and worse. You know, they bring up the YouTube videos that Dan was posting online, you know, all the disgusting videos, the creepy videos he was posting. Alexa Nicholas then talks about her story on Zoe 101. And, you know, I was familiar with Alexa's stories, so nothing she said really surprised me. But she goes into detail about this episode called Backpacks on Zoe 101, where she's squirting this goo in Jamie Lynn's face. It was just so disgusting. A costumer that worked on iCarly and Victorious also discussed how Dan seemed to have had some arrested development. It seemed like, you know, he just made all these inappropriate jokes, was making people massage him, all the women massage him, which was just awful. They then go more into detail with the inappropriate scenes with Ariana Grande, and I don't even want to get into that because I feel like I've talked enough about that and I've thought enough about it. So, you know, they go into detail more with that. They then showed this video or this interview of Dan saying that he likes when the cast gets sassy with them because then he can put them in really uncomfortable situations. And that was just, it just was so telling, the power he wielded and just how sick he was. Because you're working with children.
I love it when the cast gets sassy with me because I get to write all the scripts with some very talented writers, but I can put them in any horrible predicament I choose.
Then there's a clip at the St. Jude charity concert where the Victorious cast and I believe some iCarly people were there, and Dan's telling the kids like, oh, you guys can ask them whatever you want. It doesn't matter. Ask them whatever you want. You can touch their hair. They then talked about Jeanette McCurdy's mom dying and how Jeanette went back to set so quickly after her mom passed, and it was very peculiar that she came back so quickly. And Nickelodeon also launched an internal investigation on Sam and Cat, and at this point Dan wasn't allowed to interact with anyone on the set. You know, he was moved into like his office and he would write notes to people and give them to write like corrections and stuff. He wasn't allowed to interact with the cast anymore, which again blows my mind that it took them like how many years? It took them like over 20 years to finally do something. They then discuss how things started to really change once Me Too began. Once the Me Too movement came, things really started to change, and that's when Nickelodeon let Dan go, and they gave him a $7 million severance pay, which is disgusting. He does not deserve a severance pay. He does not deserve that. Then for the last couple minutes of the documentary, the kids are just talking, or the kids now adults are talking about the effects of child stardom and what it was like working on these sets and what they're dealing with today. So all kinds of self-esteem issues, dealing with body image issues, and, you know, all kinds of things. So they're all still reeling and trying to heal and cope with what they went through. Drake also talks about his own legal troubles briefly, and I wanted to talk about this for a little bit because it was found that Drake is not this raging PDF file that the internet tried to make him out to be for all these years. I'm sure Drake's hands are not clean. You know, he's made his mistakes. He's done things he shouldn't. Absolutely. No one's denying that. He's not a perfect person at all, and he needs a lot of help. So I speak more about Drake's case in the coming moments in this video, but I just wanted to take a pause and kind of explain more of how I see Drake, because I think his situation is so wild to me, because I feel like there are a lot of people on the internet. I feel like the cadence is they either want to absolve Drake completely and act like he's blameless, or they want to vilify him and completely bash him and act like he's this S-air and all this stuff, when it has been proven that he didn't do anything physical with this girl. He cut contact with her as soon as he found out her age. However, when he cut off contact, he said something like, oh, hit me up when you're older, text me when you're older, or something like that, which already is like, why are you even, like, what's wrong with you? Like, what is wrong with you? And so Drake has done, I think there was also some, I haven't looked into this, but there was also some reports of him, you know, being very harmful to his girlfriend back in the 2000s. So his hands are not clean here. And I feel like it's important to make the conversation that Drake is clearly a man that is, you know, he's very troubled in a lot of ways, but I think he's trying to rectify those things now. You know, him coming out and him doing these interviews and speaking up about this, I think he's attempting to rectify the past, which I commend him for. But I don't think we need to completely absolve him of what he's done either. I don't think he got the proper support he needed at the time when all of this happened. I mean, he said that the only person who was really there for him was Dan. You know, he's working with people that he then realized were actually against him the whole time. I just don't think he had the proper support he needed to really properly heal from this, because I actually caught an interview that he did recently and he was crying and talking about, how do I explain this stuff to my son and all of these things. So I think he expresses a lot of remorse, a lot of regret. But yeah, he definitely did some really messed up stuff, and it's really kind of annoying to me that I see people wanting to fully absolve him when, again, we can acknowledge his victimhood, but also acknowledge that he's done a lot of things wrong. You know, I think that's very important. And I'm not saying that we should be watching Drake with a microscope or like a hawk, you know, following this documentary, but I am curious to see what he does following this whole documentary. You know, it's plunged him back into the spotlight, and he can use that for good or use that for evil, you know? Like, it's up to him. The choice is his, what he does with it, but I hope he does the right thing. I hope he walks the narrow road and, you know, really tries to rectify everything. It seems like he is. And, you know, I want to stay optimistic, but at the end of the day, you know, I think it's worth just seeing what he does and just seeing if he truly, you know, makes amends for what he's done.
The story that I'm going to be able to tell my son one day, is it going to be somebody else telling him about his dad? You know, about, yeah, you know, your dad got chewed up and spit out by the world, and then he made these horrible, you know, these bad decisions, and he didn't make it. And what would that mean for him moving forward if anything happened to him? Or am I going to be able to, oh man, or am I going to be able to tell him when he's in moments in his life that he's struggling with, that I understand?
You know, but he was not this PDF file that people made him out to be. You know, it was found that the girl, you know, fabricated a lot of things. She lied about her age. And once Drake found out about her age, he immediately cut contact with her. And the girl was apparently stalking his wife and all this stuff. So it's just a lot of crazy stuff that was going on. You can find a lot of those details from the sentencing video that's on YouTube, and also just podcast interviews that Drake has done over the years talking about the situation. But yeah, like I said, Drake's hands are not 100% clean, but he was not this raging PDF file that everyone made him out to be. So I'm glad that now that he's told his story, people are doing their own digging and figuring out what the truth is. Again, like I said, Drake has a lot of issues, but I'm glad that he told his story and did it on his own terms. And I hope that this is helping his healing process. I hope it's not hindering it. I hope it's helping it. And so that way he can be a better man for his family, for his son, and, you know, just really spread awareness about this. All right, so that is basically the end of my recap of Quiet on Set. So now I'm gonna get into a couple things from the aftermath. And what's nice about me being on TikTok now is I can use my own TikToks as references instead of, you know, having to pull other people's TikToks. But I wanted to talk about Dan Schneider's rebuttal. So Dan posted a video on his YouTube channel, I think on Tuesday, on his rebuttal about everything. And it was absolute hogwash. Like, I felt like I was losing brain cells watching this. I literally felt like I was losing brain cells. It was just so, I'm like, this man isn't very smart. This man isn't very smart, you know? So we're gonna get into it. So I took some notes of what he said, so let's discuss. So first we have Boogie from iCarly, so he played Tebow. Boogie is conducting this interview first and foremost, which is insane. You already know that that's a ploy to control the narrative. So they first spoke on the massages, and Dan's like, oh, it was wrong. Immediately, it was wrong, and I should have never put anyone in that position. And it just sounded like he was saying things just to sound right, or to sound like this is what people want to hear from him. It didn't sound sincere. It just seemed very controlled and contrived. Like this entire thing just felt very, very controlled, very contrived. So yeah. Then we get into, again, like they're making Tebow here, or Boogie, sound like he's being this hard interviewer. He's like, I'm going to ask you the hard questions. I want to know this. That was disturbing. Mind you, when you look up Boogie's credentials, he is not a journalist. So why is he even conducting this interview in the first place? It was a mockery. I felt like they were mocking the victims, quite honestly. He then says that the comments on the writer's room were painful for him, and that he said that it hurt that he didn't pay it forward to other writers on set, that he was treated very well when he was getting into the business, and it's painful for him that he wasn't doing the same for other people. Then Boogie says, let's speak directly to the people that didn't have a good experience with you. And Dan's like, oh, you know me, you've worked on my sets. And I didn't like that, again, because it felt like a manipulative thing. It's like, oh, well, you know me, you know I'm a good guy. You know, like, again, trying to spin the narrative in his favor. And he said that he'd snap at people sometimes, and that there were so many times where, while watching Quiet on Set, where he wanted to pick up the phone and call the people he wronged. And it's like, why didn't you? If you wanted to call people and talk about what the wrongs that you've done, why didn't you? Like, I just don't understand that. Like, you were so ready to have a rebuttal literally less than 24 hours after the documentary dropped fully. Okay. They also discussed like the inappropriate jokes, and they were like, oh, some of these jokes are inappropriate for children. Some of them are.
Some people think that some of those jokes are inappropriate for children. What do you think of that?
When they didn't even address Penelope Taint. Honestly, guys, I'm like, this is getting really annoying to talk about, because he didn't even address Penelope Taint. He didn't address like so many of the inappropriate jokes, like, and the actual things. Like, another thing I forgot to mention was like the sugar sketch, where like they would have sugar coming down into these kids' mouths, and what would happen is when you have sugar in your mouth like that for a long time, it starts to congeal. Like, the sugar starts to congeal, and it literally looks like, you know, cum dripping down your chin. He then talks about how that there were executives above him. There were so many people above him, so they should have, you know, told him basically like I wasn't responsible for the jokes. I had a lot of people, you know, I had a huge chain of command here. Again, we know Nickelodeon is trash, so we're not surprised, you know, they're all in cahoots here, so there's no shock about that. They then also discussed the on-air dares, and that some of them went too far. He was like, yeah, some of them went too far, but not most of them. And I'm just like, did you not see Brian's face? Did you not, like, I don't, like, y'all, I'm just like, oh my gosh, I'm really trying here. Boogie then talks about the salaries, and he's like, I know you don't divvy up salaries. And then Dan says that this is a standard practice, that, you know, sometimes you'll pay two writers one salary, that this is a standard practice, and that he speaks about doing it to other people. He's done it to men and women. He's done it to all different kinds of people. And I'm just like, yeah, but have you ever had it done to you? Alexa Nicholas asked this question in her video. She's like, has this ever happened to you? You have no idea of what you speak. You don't know of what you speak. And this part really bothered me, how they brought up this whole diversity shtick. Like, they brought up this entire diversity shtick about, oh my gosh, look at all the diversity and the people I've employed on my sets and blah, blah, blah. And I've won an achievement award for this. And I mean, they glossed over the things that actually happened. They glossed over Raquel Lee, which is another thing I forgot to mention. Raquel Lee, you know, on the Amanda show, she had a birthday cake, and Dan basically yelled at her saying that she doesn't deserve that cake. I mean, they glossed over so many things. They then spoke on Amanda trying to get emancipated, and he made it seem so simple. Like, oh, she ran away from home. I tried to get her emancipated, and it didn't work out. And I'm just like, you didn't address the hot tub thing. You didn't address all the creepy positions you put her in. You didn't address any of that. You're just making it seem like I was just being a good friend. And then Boogie literally says, I think it's great that you're there for people when they need you. And I'm just like, really? And it's just like, it's so sickening how they're really trying to spin the narrative here. He then discusses how horrible Brian Peck was, and he was like, I can't believe he was allowed to work on Disney after all the letters of support. And then he tries to cry. Then he tries to cry some tattooed tears. You didn't see not one teardrop come out. He tries to really put up this front like he's so devastated for Drake. I'm like, nah, I'm not buying it. Obviously, no one's buying it. And then he talks about how he feels that for future child stars, they need to have a therapist on set and ask the child if the child really wants to do this. So have a licensed therapist on set. And I actually agree with that they should have a licensed therapist on set. But we also should have vetting of the parents and vetting of the producers. How about we have that too, huh? How about we do that? So that in a nutshell, I know I sound like so exhausted. It's just been a long work day for me. But basically, that is kind of the end of Dan Schneider's rebuttal. You can watch it for yourself on his channel. It's absolute garbage, so I don't recommend wasting the 20 minutes that I wasted. But anyway, that was his rebuttal. So now I want to get into what the Netscast has done. So the Netscast is in some hot water. So the Nets Declassified podcast, they went on their TikTok live, I believe Monday night, and they basically were making jokes saying, give me your holes, Daniel. And like Devin was making all these jokes and they were laughing. So I'm actually going to play my TikTok about that situation. Watch here. So Devin Werkheiser and the cast of Nets Declassified are being slammed right now on social media for mocking Drake Bell after he recounted his experience on the documentary series Quiet on Set. I believe they were on TikTok Live and they were basically joking and laughing about Drake's experience.
Daniel, we told you never to speak about that. Get back in your hole, Daniel, and give me your holes. Sorry, we shouldn't joke about this. We really shouldn't. This is awful. Because this is about us. Listen, our set was not like that. And no, it's fucking awful.
Drake then posted this tweet in response saying, Nets declassless, this is wild, laugh it up guys, laugh it up, give me your holes, really? Alright man, I gotta give it to Drake with that one. That was clever. Nets declassless. That was clever. Devin then posted a response saying, I was being an idiot today, no way around it. I feel horrible that my dumb self was even speaking about this without seeing it. I watched Quiet on Set tonight and I'm horrified by the gravity of what Drake and others shared. Truly heartbroken about what my fellow actors went through. I can't believe they weren't protected. I'm sorry for compounding any hurt. He then also tweeted, so sorry to Drake, gutted I hurt you. Yeah, it is incredibly tasteless and just disgusting that they would make jokes like that and laugh like that. And you could tell that he kind of caught himself. He was like, oh man, I screwed up here. But I mean, the damage was done. Again, you would expect that because, you know, y'all were on the same network and you guys were child stars around the same time, that there'd be more empathy there. And then you would treat this with the care and respect it deserves. But unfortunately, that was not the case. You know, I do watch the Nets pod sometimes. You know, I won't say these people are like my favorite guys in the world. It's just I watch them kind of passively. But, you know, I have always noticed this sort of cadence from them that, hey, it was not like that on our set. Like him saying that, oh, nothing like that happened on our set. You know, it's very dismissive. It's like, oh, well, it didn't happen to me. It didn't happen to us. It's like they're always trying to other themselves. And that's kind of what I catch from their podcast sometimes. Plus, a lot of times their podcasts can get pretty vulgar for me. But anyway, I just think this was a really, really horrible mismark, and I think their podcast may take a hit from this, so really disappointing, and just hope that they keep their mouths shut from now on. So the Nets Declassified cast got on their podcast the other day to address the controversy surrounding the jokes that they made about Drake Bell in the Quiet on Set documentary. So they said that they hadn't seen the documentary when making those jokes, and that the joke was not directed towards Drake. So, let's watch.
Earlier this week, we were on a TikTok Live. If you haven't seen the clip, if you haven't seen what's going on, we were on a TikTok Live being asked to comment on the Quiet on Set documentary, which we hadn't seen. And, super shit joke came out that was referenced at Daniel and looked like I was talking about Drake, and it all overlaps. And we fucked up, I get it. We hadn't seen the doc. And everyone was asking us for our opinions on it.
Oh, on the TikTok.
Yeah. And I get it. Now having seen the documentary, it's so disturbing. I get they were asking us
and we had no clue of the magnitude of what they were discussing.
But
we're also multitasking. I'm sitting there editing the sound. I thought we had lost all of the footage.
Now we've watched it, and I get it. If I had just watched especially that third episode and then watched us joking like that,
You would be upset.
I would be like, are they sociopaths? Actually, is something wrong with them?
So with that, get it clear, you guys were not speaking on that. You weren't talking about.
No, we hadn't watched. I didn't know that.
They referenced.
Wasn't sitting with the details at all.
You said that the
I know
Drake
what the
stuff
joke
was-
sounds like, but I was talking to Daniel.
You were
the way that
talking
we fucking do
to me while I was working. You know, people like, Daniel, you're off camera. What was going on? I'm sitting there at the desk working on audio, super multitasking.
Yeah.
And that statement was directed to me in the extreme way that we disparage each other.
Yeah.
My constituents were just completely upset, and they wanted clear that we were not referring to that.
No, but we fucked up.
Yeah, absolutely.
I get what it looks like. I get it. It's overlapping each other in the fucking
Horrible
worst
timing.
way.
So what bothered me about this response is the fact that they claimed that they had no idea the severity of the documentary. They didn't know exactly what had happened, but Devin literally said that, oh, that Drake Bell stuff was, you know, like he basically was talking about how crazy it was and how awful it was. And he even said we shouldn't be joking about this. And our set wasn't like that. So how can you say that you didn't really know when clearly you knew in the video? So it just kind of felt like they were making excuses, and you just don't joke about stuff like that. You, Devin, said, give me your holes, and that was a reference to Drake. Like, you wouldn't have said that had you not known what was going on with Drake. Again, there's just certain things you just shouldn't joke about. There's just certain things that are not funny at all. And you really shouldn't comment on something if you don't have the context. If you don't know about something, if you haven't seen something, just say, I haven't seen it, and move on. That's all you gotta say. That's all you gotta say. And you could have avoided this entire thing. But, hey, it is what it is. I will say they gave a lot of input in the documentary, and they really did a whole commentary on the doc. And Daniel even said that child stardom should not be a thing, which I agree with. But again, because of the way everything has gone down, it just feels more like damage control than actually, you know, sincerely getting on their podcast and really discussing it organically. So yeah, just terrible, terrible mismark. I then also want to discuss really quickly, Drake Bell actually came out yesterday and said that Josh and him have talked, that Josh has reached out and they're really discussing things and he's helping him heal. And basically Josh was getting slammed and dragged all over social media. Josh was getting dragged for basically turning his back on Drake and supporting Dan Schneider. Josh actually dismissed Jeanette McCurdy, and he basically ignored everything Jeanette had to say, and a lot of people were coming for him for that. So he then reached out to Drake. So my thing is, I'm just hoping that Josh did it sincerely, but I have a feeling that because Josh was getting lambasted on social media, that's why he came to Drake's aid. But anyway, whatever. Hopefully it's sincere, and hopefully they hash out things. But yeah. So before I sign off here, I just want to remind everyone watching that we have not reached a victory yet. You know, Dan Schneider is just a tiny little, you know, symptom of a bigger problem. You know, there's so many bad actors in Hollywood, right? There's so many people throughout the entertainment industry, the movie industry. It expands so deep through so many institutions in our society. Like, this is not just on Dan or even Diddy who's falling down. You know, some people are trying to say, oh, this Diddy thing is a distraction. I'm like, no, this is an exposition. Like, this is that the right word? Expose. There we go. Like, this is an expose of everything going on. I mean, sure, there are always going to be bigger things happening, but I'm happy that the veil is finally being torn. People are finally seeing the facade that is Hollywood, you know? At this point, you can't look away. You cannot look away and say that everything's all fine and dandy. You can't look at all these celebrities and think that everything is hunky-dory in their world, or that, you know, and it just shows at the end of the day that you should not be relying on these people for your moral compass, your ethics. You shouldn't be expecting these people to be morally great. And let me not be unfair here. I know there's a lot of good people in Hollywood. A lot of people just want to make a living. You know, you have like the average Joes really that are just passionate about the craft of film or writing and entertainment. And so I don't want to make it seem like everyone is bad, but this is clearly a cancer within the industry, within the entire system, and it would need to be uprooted from the ground up. But I'm glad that the expose is finally happening. I mean, again, like, you had Barbara Walters telling Corey Feldman that he's destroying the industry by exposing this. I'm going to play that clip, by the way. Y'all are going to see it. But now I feel like people like Corey are finally being listened to after decades of whistleblowing. So I really want some real legislation passed. I want to see things really actively change, and yeah, I guess we'll just have to see. But it's good that this documentary came out, but we have to remember that it's not just Dan.
I'm saying that there are people that were the people that did this to both me and Corey that are still working, they're still out there, and they're some of the richest, most powerful people in this business.
And they are.
And they do not want me saying what I'm saying right now.
Are you saying that they're files?
Yes.
And that they're still in this business?
Yes.
That's what, and that's what you were saying in your book. When you talk to when you talk to
and
parents,
they don't want me here right now. Trust
Corey,
me. They want me dead.
There are a lot of parents out here who want to put their kids in this business. Their kids are cute, they're great actors. Da, da, da. What would you say to a parent who just has the best of intentions, who's coming here with their child? If you're saying that there's a lot of predators in this industry.
It's a many-feathered bird. Okay? Be careful what you wish for. That's what I'll tell you. You know, don't go into it with naivety. Don't go into it thinking that it's all roses and sunglasses.
You're damaging an entire industry.
I'm sorry, I'm not trying to.
That is basically my breakdown of Quiet on Set. Again, I know if I seem a bit low energy here, it's just because I've just been looking into this a lot these past few days, and it's just very, very disgusting and disturbing. And I think you need to just really take care of yourself if you're, you know, incredibly sensitive to these sorts of topics. Again, just feel horrible for Drake and all these child actors. And I really hope that this actually brings about some type of change, maybe some legislation in regards to child acting. I really do hope that this does something and does something big, because you know, it's been going on for way too long, and we've all known it. We've all been privy to it, but now the media wants us to care, as in they now want to care. They want to take action, but we've all known. So we'll see. Another thing that I thought about as well with Brian Peck that I wanted to bring up real quick is an open secret. So actually, I have heard about Brian Peck for a long time because I watched An Open Secret, and that documentary goes super deep into everything in Hollywood, the nastiness, the P rings and all of that. So if you want to know about that, you know, go watch An Open Secret. But it also talks about television and how television is programming. Get it? Tell-a-vision programming. Yep, that's a lot. That's a rabbit hole that, you know, you can go down if you wish, but yep, just wanted to put that out there. So I hope you guys enjoyed my video covering Quiet on Set. It's a very, very huge thing. So yeah, we're going to probably hear about it for a lot longer. But thank you guys so much for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to y'all next time. Bye.